got a call from Tom a week ago Friday saying essentially congratulations. The guy from Disney who you were coming to London to hear speak isn't going to make it. Would you like to take a slot? And to me, being a huge Disney fan, I was like, well, yeah, no pressure there. I don't know if you're here today with the same sentiment I had, which, bummer, now I got to hear myself speak. But then he ratcheted it up a notch, and those of you who, like me, have known Tom for a lot of years will see the irony and the humor in this. He said, this guy had a 45-minute slot, but I would like for you to do a TED Talk type speech where you get 18 minutes. So Tom Dengenis is asking me to be brief. You got to understand, we both share a love for words. A lot of my inspiration and some of what I'm going to tell you comes from Tom's words. What we do not share is a love for brevity. I'm going to tell you a couple things, break the ice a little bit, and then we'll start into this more formalized, perhaps mission impossible to hit an 18-minute mark. This is my family photo. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Go to Disney World Orlando to the Star Wars weekends. I've been 3 years in a row for this photo. That's my 10-year-old daughter, Lucy, who's dressed as Princess Leia. She and my wife, April, have been having a blast in London. If you're like me and your heart starts beating just a little bit faster every time you see a crane, London is a great place to be right now. Sunday night, I walked out there in the Millennium Bridge, center of the river, turned around, was just in awe of the skyline, and it's phenomenal. That's it. Nothing else fancy, nothing else really important, so let's get started, shall we? I once hiked 28.5 miles on a Saturday. Why in the world would you do such a thing? It's perhaps your first question. Well, for me, it went back to the previous fall. This was spring of 2014. Fall of 2012, I endured a 69-day nuclear power plant outage. Endured is perhaps a charitable word to use. I booked time for 69 straight days. It was baseline to be a 36-day outage. Multiple starts, repeats, errors led to it being 69. And I lost something a little bit important that fall, and it wasn't anything related to integrity or appreciation at work. For you see, I was in the project controls group, so we were sort of insulated. What I'd learned, I'd only been there since March of that year, so I was still kind of a nuclear baby, was that in project controls in our major projects organization, really all we did was report. Thumbs up, thumbs down, level, SPI trending, all kind of stuff that we're similar with. So it really wasn't on us to do well or not do well. And I'd never been in a role like that. Previous to that in my career, I'd always been part of delivering an improvement, achieving a goal. I didn't sign up to be a reporter, and yet that's what I was, and because it ran long, I kept reporting. But the really important thing that I lost control of that fall was of my health. Now, I'm notorious for remembering projects based on restaurants I've eaten at. I can walk you right now to where I had fish and chips on Sunday. I can walk you also to where I had a great piece of halibut last night. So I'd added some weight, stopped exercising. I thought, well, this spring it'll be a great time to do a hike, to make sure I'm out putting the miles on. And it was also an effort, and I don't want to pitch this in any way as something that was the primary driver, but to raise money for a charity called Make-A-Wish, which sends kids to great places like Disney World when they're battling life-threatening conditions like cancer, leukemia being a prominent one. So it was a fundraising hike for Make-A-Wish. I did the 28.5 miles in one day. The hike was supposed to be 24 miles, and I'm going to show you the hike profile. And my goal was to go 26. My wife had run a marathon. I never had. I'm not a runner, but I was like, if she's done 26, I'm going to do 26. Well, by 8 a.m., I was guaranteed of that because starting out in the dark at 5, I've been lost twice. So I picked up an extra 4 miles. So all I had to do was finish. The reason I went to this slide is that this really, in a simple line, shows you my journey with Synchro. I had an initial run up and a peak and then some down, and then a really steep ascent and a peak and then a little drop off and then a final peak. Now, The last descent, don't worry about that. That doesn't really have anything to do with what we're going to talk about today. I will tell you this, it's awfully hard on the knees. Don't get to the top and celebrate that, hey, it's done when you've got a descent like that ahead, because you're going to pay for it later. So how did this story go? Well, having been through that disastrous 2012 outage, I had a great project manager I was working with, Skip. I have a couple of stories about Skip, and Skip came to the team spring of 2013, and we had planned to bring in a Stator, and it was the first time in North America that we were anywhere in a nuclear power plant. There was an attempt to replace a Stator, the high pressure turbine, and both the oil skid and the cooling water skid. So part of our failure came from essentially hubris that we were smart enough to do what nobody else had ever done before. This can happen. Part of it came from really essentially a lack of good planning. What I learned in a very brief time was that nuclear plants were great at operating, but were really challenged in this high pressure outage execution, like I had seen somewhere before. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of hope. It was the season of despair. For me, it was Las Vegas, Nevada, 2008. This little strip of desert that had no business being inhabited had become a city because they built the Hoover Dam and men needed a place to party and spend their money, had grown as a city because the mob needed a place to hide their money, and so casinos sprung up. And by the time I got there to help with a distribution center startup, it was the epicenter globally for gambling, entertainment, the adult statement, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It wasn't true for me, because when I was challenged to come up with an innovation, my mind went back to Las Vegas. And while in Las Vegas, I met a guy who got me engaged with Primavera as a more technical resource, learned scheduling, having come more from a construction project management background, but learned the classical scheduling. Went to San Francisco. While in San Francisco, was invited to go meet with some guys doing an airport renovation in Oakland. Like we heard about this morning, it was in a renovation where they had to stay 100% open. We sat down at the Turner job offices there in Oakland and heard about a project in Sacramento, and there was a guy, I believe he was in Australia at the time, on with some PowerPoint slides by the name of Tom Dengenis, talking about something called Synchro. Well, let's step back. I can't take you to the middle of an outage. I can't take you to the middle of a high-pressure job site. But a lot of us have been there. And for me, it feels a lot like this. This is whitewater rafting. And in whitewater rafting, you have to work together as a team to essentially react together. High side is the term they call it. The force of the river going downstream is going to grab the upstream side of the boat, so you learn to react most times in high side downstream, which is what I'm trying to do and the guide's trying to do. The other 4 people in the boat are tourists, so what's going to happen is what happened to us in 2012. The river's going to win, and we're going to be swimmers. Perhaps you've had this happen to you on a project. So that's the feeling I had from 2012, and that's a feeling I observed in Las Vegas in 2008, when at the second largest construction project in the history of the world, I took what I'd seen from Tom Dengenis and introduced it to Tishman Construction. But what did I see from Tom? Well, I saw something that I appreciated because I had already begun to formulate this, that there were 2 parts to scheduling. There's a science, and most of us as planners and schedulers in the room are probably pretty good at this science, right? We can go on and on about critical path, float, relationship types, constraints, right? Run those reports, put out that data. But it's the art of communicating the schedule to stakeholders. And having done on-site construction project management for a lot of years, I'd also come to realize that it was vitally important to identify these stakeholders and make sure they had a place at the table, or you had absolutely no chance of success unless you were a claims consultant and success meant billings at the back end. No offense meant, but this is the truth. And I also started to recognize this. We had good tools for the science, right? I could show up and run the computer and come to the Monday job site meeting and say, hey, we're ready. Here's a good schedule. But then we fell on our face with these tools for the art. When I'm sitting there and everybody around the table is telling me it's going to be done Friday, it didn't take long to realize Friday meant I have no idea. Let me just get out of this meeting and get back to the field, right? And then this. Across industries, across those varying things I've done, because in case you didn't pick up on it from the intro, I'm one of those chaps that had a really hard time figuring out what he wanted to be when he grew up. But every time I'd been engaged in a successful project, this was the truth. People do it. So I had these thoughts that had begun to formulate that when I was there in the airport, listening to the challenge they were going to have to refit while at 100% capacity, I saw this slide. I don't know if you still use this, if you have the same slide deck, but I asked you to email it to me and I kept it. My emotion when I saw this slide, saw the demo of what Synchro had done at Sacramento Airport to pull out lifting and rigging challenges, safety challenges, it's best reflected in the words of the famous English poet and clergyman, John Newton. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. There was a way to communicate to all the stakeholders. And now that I'd seen it, that's what I wanted to do. Walked out of that meeting, called the regional rep for Oracle P6, told him about what I'd seen, and said, I can't wait to do this. And this is exactly what he said. And some of you I know have lived the precise sentiment. Don't mess with this 4D stuff, there's no money in it. Fortunately, I'd also, through really my first job out of school, learned that you don't work just for money. And if you truly want to succeed as a company, because the small group of operations consultants, the engineers that had formed this company, their mantra was hands-on business solutions. If you truly want to succeed and have enduring success, you solve problems. Then the money takes care of itself. And that's exactly what I told him. I said, I don't know if there's money in this or not, but I know it will solve a problem. I saw that on a Friday. On a Saturday, I walked into the on a Monday, I walked into the job site offices at the Echelon project. Just up the street from Echelon, Tishman was engaged in the city center, which has been now finished in Las Vegas. And we heard the story of how they had a crane erected, and based on site conditions and the distance that they'd built out these multiple buildings and a lack of proactive planning, they did not have an option identified to demobilize the crane. And the Echelon project was terrified that this would happen to them. And thinking ahead, they'd signed a really smart engineer to figure out some way to see what the job site was going to look like week by week. What had he done? He'd made PDFs week by week, put them into a PowerPoint deck, and Catherine Cabala, the scheduler there at Tishman Echelon, shows this to me, and I looked at it, and I flipped to like the third page, and I said, I don't know what to tell you about this, except this page is a fairy tale, and everything else in that deck is a fairy tale, and we all know it. And I don't know how in the world anybody's going to be smart enough to keep up with this. But let me tell you about this thing I saw last week. So we got a Toshiba laptop with flames on it because maybe you fought this battle. IT wouldn't give us a CAD level workstation. We had Stephen Williams flying over to do training. I had to get something, and I said, I'm going to get the loudest, most obnoxious gamer's laptop I can, and I'm going to walk it in those job site offices, and these guys are going to see what we can do with a credit card and a little bit of technology. We had an elaborate 3-month plan to sell Synchro. We loaded up about half the model on Flamey. The little cartoon you see here was drawn by the CAD guys who were jealous that this had more horsepower than the desktops they had. And they were doing, they were solving real problems. They were solving for where to put forms so they wouldn't have to come back later and cut concrete, but they couldn't get through the problem set fast enough on the workstations they had, so sometimes they're having to tell them to just go ahead and pour the floor. Insane types of things that if IT leads and business doesn't can happen. So anyway, we had this elaborate plan. Well, Catherine and Flamey went and sat down in her project manager's office, and we were about 10% ready. The light bulb went off for him. He could see. He said, come with me. Walked down the hall, happened to be a VP there. What happens? Thursday morning, I get a call from Catherine. Charlie, we want a purchase order. Synchro licenses, you and your partner engaged for 3 years throughout the project. This is how we're going to run the project. Unbelievable. The next morning, Friday, August 8th, steel 10 stories in the air, 15 stationary cranes, 3 mobile cranes on site. Boyd Gaming puts the project on hold. It's still on hold to this day. But I had this spark that stuck with me as I went back to knowing what I knew to do, took care of some other distribution centers, and eventually landed in nuclear. So I went back to Las Vegas and brought that forward. I just show you one of the model files that I kept in Synchro. And perhaps Synchro played a role in stopping the project. It's hard, I don't have a laser pointer here, but the piping over here that's green, there's a tunnel wall that was shared from 2 hotels. Echelon was 100% funded. $4.5 billion worth of money on the way. The 2 hotels weren't. They shared a wall. That wall was also part of a tunnel. And the real rub for them was, at one point, 70% of their laydown was going to be serviced through that tunnel, and the guys running the power and water through that tunnel had exclusive access for 3 to 6 months by contract. So they're going to lose access to 70% of their job site, which can be a bit of a rub when you plan to staff up to 7,000 workers. So perhaps part of what happened in the Echelon Boyd management was a realization between the market and the challenges we faced, the best thing to do is put it on hold. It's slated to restart this year as Resort World, a group of Chinese investors. We'll see. They've gone through 3 PMs. Don't know that they're turning dirt, but it may someday rise out of the desert. So now finally we get to the stories I really want to tell you. Okay. We're not going to TED Talk with this, right? So I started this way at Tom's request, and it's right. Start with the project that went off the rails, bring you back forward, right? Coming from Vegas. So what happened? Well, we put together a team of guys. And that team, having now been at nuclear coming on 18 months, included the guys who were going to the field, and they were going to cut pipe. They were going to turn wrenches. They were going to weld. And we took on a specific project. And that's the real key project, but to understand that one, I've got to tell you about the bigger project that was going on over our heads. This is a Stator. The first work I actually scheduled was the earthwork to take that railway down to blow the gravel level and build it back up because they determined the old railway would collapse under the weight of this 1.6 million ton Schnabel car, which is a rail car that has 2 ends that join to the load, and Stator that would arrive. It give you some sense of the size of it. You've got 1 million pounds in between the 2 ends of the Schnabel. And I can take you to this, relatively speaking. There were railway aficionados from all over North America that came to see the Schnabel car. Schnabel cars don't move a lot, but when they do, somehow, with the internet, it gets out there. We wanted to see this. And it was an impressive sight. And although we had a 69-day outage in 2012, at the end of the day,
hey, forget how big that thing is, don't you?
We did bring in a really big Stator, safely rig out an old one, rig in a new one, and come back to full power. And at the end of the day, safety, quality, and then reliability of the base power to the grid are our top priorities, which was one of the reasons outage scheduling had not been done perhaps to the level of execution that it could. And this is what we did in Synchro to simulate, to visualize what was going to go on when the Stator arrived. We had a new challenge in 2014, fall of 2014, that did not exist in fall of 2012. This is sobering, but it's the reality of what happened. The heavy crane, the gantry crane that we had to put up to move the Stator, the company that built that crane for us in 2012 had a carriage mechanism that could shift out of the way so we could pull the rotor out of the center of the Stator. They left our job site, went to another job site. They dropped a Stator. One young man died. That rigging company is no longer operating in the nuclear industry. So we had to find another heavy rigging company, go through a whole other set of engineering to validate the rigging for the building. And that was how I got approval to even model the upstairs part. And that's where, even when I got to the top, there was that other dip. Well, this was during that other dip because of the last project I'm going to tell you about was the real success. And after the real success, when I came in and said, we need to model this, the only reason they agreed to do it was, well, yes, it will help to communicate the safety. Those red areas that are showing up, those are areas where we essentially emptied the building. 6 people on one side, 6 people on another. They shut off parking lots so they could get in helicopters as a reaction to what had happened in another site. No sense of let's do it because it will improve our delivery, but more a communication, which there was value, and safety, there was value. And it did help improve this plan. And on a schedule of 43 days, we actually executed 40, and then there were some delays not charged to our project, but charged to the vendor because of defects in the Stator that were repaired. So we showed improvement, significant improvement. We started with a more reasonable schedule. We executed within the schedule we said that we would execute. The one thing that we had identified that will come up when we talk about the project one floor down is the significant amount of time we spent either dealing with paint or dealing with grout. Now, with grout, we had nothing we could do. It was going to take what it took to pour it. It was going to take as long as it took to set it. We had to do our tests. With paint, we found that we had some opportunity. Now, simply this effort, so this was tied to like a level 1.5, 1+ schedule, not even level 2, paid dividends, allowed the team to simulate and to play. And this led me to question, based on that slide we saw from Tom back in 2008, and based on the struggle I went through here, why is this so hard to sell? And was it market timing, people not wanting to spend money? Was it the entrenched P6, or was it something maybe more universal and insidious at work? And I think that's the answer. If it weren't, then why would we have a quote like this? To improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often. Something drove Winston Churchill to say that. There's a natural resistance to change. Now, we're in this room recognizing that and willing to change. But how do we deal with our stakeholders, some of which finance us, some of whom provide us services, to get to this change point? Well, one of the things I think we should go back to is something that we all knew how to do as kids, right? Now, my wife was kind enough to go out and find a soccer ball. She did not find the nice one as you advised. She couldn't find anything that cost 40 pounds. She said the most expensive thing was 16 pounds. So she went with the only one that was England. But that being said, we've got a soccer ball here today. As kids, we know how to play. We don't even have to be coached how to play. We just do it. And what do we do when we play? We simulate, right? We do things. So in football, I was a goalie. And I can still, to this day, without having done this for a lot of years, stand in front of you and hopefully not make an idiot of myself, right? And do things that I simulated in practice so that when I got into a game, I'd have a natural reaction. My hands would do what I had practiced or trained them to do. And I didn't fight this. This was great, right? Yeah, let me get out of class and go to practice. This is what we wanted to do. So I think maybe we go back there. We're using these tools because intuitively, from the very first time we find some buddies and go outside, this is how our brains work. We were built to play and to simulate, to practice, and to enjoy it, not to fight it. So here's the big project. our effort was to, and you can see you model for what you're trying to solve. We didn't even really have a good picture of a stator up here. But we had a return header piping, provides cooling water. We had a supply header. We had cuts we had to make on both. And we had a lead box. Now in 2012, I went to job meetings every night at 11 p.m. My shift was like a noon to midnight. And this was work that we performed, major projects with our mechanical guys, Duke electricians, so not outsourced to a vendor. But there was vendor work being done. You can barely see the green scaffold on a dance floor up above. So in 2012, we entered the outage with a 12-day baseline. 2 12-hour shifts a day, so 24/7, 12 days. We performed the work in 4.5 weeks. We spent 2 weeks looking for a slot to just get restarted once we gave over the top area to our primary vendor and lifting and rigging began, and obvious safety exclusions. You can't work in these areas. And you have a need to here integrate 11 crews in 18 by 22 by 40 feet of space. And in that space, you have the scaffolding and the equipment. And our goal going into 2014 was to do this in 72 hours. We had this model ready 12 months in advance. Like I said, we worked with the guys who are going to be in the field doing the work. We did a lot of playing, a lot of simulation, a lot of what ifs. And because of Synchro, and here I'm going to quote Tom, we challenged the concept of a report. You can't bring me any piece of paper, no matter how big, that can communicate this and can communicate this to everyone. Now, there were some villains along the way in this project. We had an outage manager who reported to a site VP who had been known to beat up major projects for wasting time on new technology. Just do it the old way. You know, these guys, they start a plant, they really do want to run it the same way for 60 years, and that makes sense. But I've learned to tell them, hey guys, we're not changing a light bulb every 18 months during an outage. We're ripping out a whole section of the house and putting in a new section. And to deliver something like that, we've got to have new tools. And we also can't get beat up by your bean counting rules that apply to changing light bulbs. Because then we're chasing our tails over these beans that don't really deliver work in the field. And I apologize, is bean counting a British term? You guys follow me when I say that? Okay, yeah. So that was, the first villain was in this phantom in our minds. When we presented this a year out, would the site VP be upset? I presented this video, described the work that had gone into it, what we planned to do with it as we onboarded the workforce that was coming in. And we were going to start our outage September 2014. Our other unit was going into an outage in March. The first words out of his mouth were this: based on what Charlie just showed us, how do we do this for my primary refueling process for the March 2014 outage? He could see. He needed this. As we came into this, we had another villain, an ex-ops guy who did our plant work order scheduling, and he looked at this work and he told me, he said, you guys are crazy. This is at least 2 weeks worth of work. Major Projects has never delivered something on this schedule at this pace before, ever. We had another vendor, another villain. Our primary vendor had a whole piping crew that traveled with him all over the world doing projects like this. He took a look at what we were doing, everything we had to cut out, everything we had to bring back in, all the congestion, knowing all the other work going on in the area. He said, with my A-team and nothing going else on in this building, I'm looking at 7 days, 24 hours a day. The last villain I'm ashamed to say was me. 3 days before, I'd recognized that based on the sequence above, we actually had more than 72 hours. So I went to Too-Tall and Bobby. Too-Tall's, you might imagine, a little bit bigger than me. He was the day shift lead, and Bobby was the night shift lead. He said, guys, we've got a little more time. Do you want more time in the outage schedule? Bobby looked at me and said, no, we're going to do this. And that afternoon, I learned something about Synchro that I had not yet learned. We went into a meeting with the mechanical guys, and other people came in, and we ended up with over 50 there. And the mechanical guys had started to have some resistance because all they had seen was the normal schedule, the bars and the times, and said, we can't do this. But as we played this through with them, and Too Tall and Bobby talked about decisions they'd made and how they would be supported, and the fact that we had identified absolutely everything that was going to go on there. We'd played a lot over the past year. The people in the room started to believe. They said it couldn't be done. That team went into the field, and they did it. On the supply side, we finished 12 hours early. On the return side, we finished 1 hour early. I took this picture. They still had 7 hours to finish. That's the last piece of pipe going in. All they have is an 8-inch root weld and an 8-inch final weld, and they are done, and they walk away. And we heard this morning that the job site was calm. And in the middle of an outage, as I already showed you, feels a lot like a whitewater rapids. In the middle of this outage, right there under the belly of the beast, as we termed it, things were calm. I walked in on day 2, and things had just fallen apart up top because we didn't tie everything together in Synchro, I'm convinced. And when things don't go well in an outage, you get a lot of help. When you're burning through 100,000 pounds an hour, critical path time, you get an awful lot of help. So there were requests for information and challenges and meetings, and I hadn't even had time to think about the guys downstairs. I took the Saturday off because there's not a lot to do while we're waiting for tagging sequences. I came in. So when I finally made it down there, I walked in, and I saw that they were right on schedule, and I found Bobby. I said, Bobby, how's it going? I'll never forget the grin on his face. He looks at me and goes, Charlie, this is easy because we've been here before. There was a responsible confidence, a certainty that the team had based on playing and simulating in Synchro. Now, if you're nodding off, you're really fighting to stay with me, just engage for just a few minutes. The stories we love best do live in us forever. And what I'm about to show you will go with me until I'm gone. As we built this model and we identified our challenges and we looked for more crews to bring in so that every one of the 11 crews would bring in, there was a guy named DJ that came in. DJ was responsible for abatement. And at the end of a meeting, he was so into me. He said, Charlie, I'm glad somebody's asking me about this stuff. He said, I've been trying to tell people, but last outage, they didn't even pay attention. He said, I've got 11 places to abate in there. And when I abate, it's either chemical with a cone of exclusion or it's needle gun with a cone of exclusion. You guys can't even think about doing what you're going to do if I have to abate by normal methods. He said, now last outage, sometimes people blew through it, but I know our guys won't, and I know based on other safety incidents, the vendor won't. So we have to deal with this. Well, this was 12 months out. So what did we do? We did some research. We discovered that in North America, there were 5 laser abatement machines. This is run by fiber optics. It vaporizes the paint, the oil, the rust, sucks it in through a HEPA vac. The operator, whether it's lead, asbestos, or regular paint, only needs to wear special glasses. And that is awesome. But if we'd figured that out 2 weeks ahead when we did our normal last horizontal vertical review, or even 3 months ahead when we commit to a schedule, we have no chance of bringing this tool into the outage. It took us 6 months of planning to figure out how to bring one in, how to get the plant to approve it, the number of tests we had to go through, to learn that the only guy in the world who can really troubleshoot the thing was in Germany. We had to make sure he was available by phone, and we had a data link to the machine because we had one fiber optic cable that had gone out of parameter for heat and had to be reset. But we went through all that. Between the test to bring it in, the labor, all in, net, new cost to the project, $150,000, give or take 100,000 pounds. It shows you its ability to go into detailed areas.
I ran that generator
Now, for our project, we never actually hit project critical path, so we couldn't claim any savings from this, but it let us hit our window and do what we said we were going to do. But upstairs, remember, I said we'd identified a problem with paint. We had these weld seams that had to be cut on 2 different pieces of the stator. That's what powers it. There's a HEPA vac system and some of the operators. So we finished on time because we brought in this machine, but upstairs, in 2012, using the fastest methods available, they had 36 hours of critical path abatement. In 2014, they did the same abatement without excluding work in any other areas in 4 hours. I'll make that investment every day, all day long, as many times as I can. Unfortunately, outages only come around every 18 months. But nobody would argue with me to say that that gave 3.2 million pounds back to the outage in critical path hours. And without Synchro, DJ and I never even talk. We're not even in the same room. I'm building the P6 beam counting schedule. He's off figuring out who's going to work what shifts and trying to wave a flag and say, hey, this work order task has me in here with a bunch of other people and nobody's listening. But we communicated, and we researched, and then we played, and then we got an approval. We had a vice president for nuclear major projects who heard about us bringing this in and said it'd never work. Well, he moved on to his next gig about a month before the outage, but I made sure he got at least 3 emails about the delivery by the team with this tool. There's a drummer born in London, perhaps you've heard of him, Phil Collins, and his band Genesis, maybe my favorite song as a boy growing up was this one, Driving the Last Spike, and I'm not going to tell you the whole song, but there's a point in it that really ties me back to this project. And the song is pointed to me for a couple reasons, and Tom, we didn't talk about this yesterday, but my grandfather passed away after a railroad accident. He was a railroad engineer. I told Tom that one of the analogies I like to use is that you should run a project like you're on rails, not like you're just randomly, bouncing down a hill. I use a ball as an example. At a camp in the summer times in the States, we play this game called Big Ball. It's a 6-foot ball. You line people up, you try to keep it between the people going down the hill. My first outage felt like that. We were just trying to hit this ball and sort of keep it going the right direction. And when I thought of rails, I meant like a roller coaster on rails. And Driving the Last Spike is a song about the history of men who died building the railroad here in Britain in the 20th century and 19th century. But there's a stanza in the song that says this: we came from the north, we came from the south, with picks and with spades and a new kind of order, showing no fear for what lies up ahead. They'll never see the likes of us again. And when I run into Tutal and Bobby and DJ and the rest of that team, we have that sense about what we did in the fall of 2014. And that in spite of intense resistance from certain parts of management, skepticism at the highest level, they'll never see the likes of us again. So fast forward to now. Well, now with the Wayno strength recognition and with every project manager lined up, how do I do this for my project? Resources became a problem. And I'm a stubborn, independent sort of thinker. And I knew I could go back to Tom, because what I've shown you to date, I built the schedule, I fed pictures to Tom's guys did it, right? Essentially, Synchro guys, the Synchro team did it. And it was a great workflow, and if you're trying to get started, I highly recommend it. The best advice I got from Tom is, Charlie, don't try to do the first one. Let us do it. Let us prove to you how fast it is. That video of the 72-hour sequence, once we had the schedule, the point cloud converted to a model, which that was also a really fast process, about 2 days. 2 hours in the field to do the point cloud data, and about a day and a half with some automatic pipe modeling software. I was amazed at how quickly you can get your as-is conditions if you don't have good drawings. But that being said, once I sent that stuff to London by email on a Wednesday morning at 10, we had the kickoff meeting the next Thursday morning. By Friday, we were 90% there. We had about 4 days of other round trip back and forth refinements, and it was done. This is not a huge, long effort. But then I wanted to see, what if I do it all on my own? No help from Synchro. So we got a 3rd-year civil engineering student. He's sitting there in a blue shirt. He's running a laptop projector. This is 9 weeks after he's been with us this year. For 3 weeks, he didn't have a computer. Nuclear IT is under the sad misconception that we work to pay their salaries. He started modeling in SketchUp. Finally, we got a authorized trial of Plant 3D. He modeled the motor, he took the schedule I built for him, he connected it, and in this review meeting, and this is the 5th time we've done the same motor, and here the project manager wanted this project more for training his new guys coming in, because they only keep 3 to 4 key resources, and then it's just kind of rolling wave of outage workers that come through for you. It's simple what we had going on. You can see the model in the middle, the focus time on the right of all the outage schedule in high def. We're still running 2 projectors. I'm at the back of the room taking notes and record keeping on timescale logic on the wall, which up till that point was our best way to bring people together. Because of some changes in the outage plan, we may have pulled 27 hours of critical path out of this 5th time evolution of the same work. Now I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this because I personally believe you don't jinx yourself talking too much until you've done the work. So if I see you a year from now, I'll look forward to telling you how we did in this outage that's getting ready to start in 2 weeks. But what am I really saying? The right guy in 2 months ran the meeting, had schedule insight, was asking the right questions, intuitively was learning scheduling in a way that, you see posts for P6 guys and they want you to have 5 years of experience. And even then, planned dates will kick you in the butt, right? Something will come up because of the nature of the software. So Skip Steele, great project manager, but a project manager, which is I learned. How do you tell a project manager is lying? We got any project managers in the room? Maybe not here, but where I am, if his lips are moving. So we were out at Skip's farm, and there's people on the back of a pickup truck. That's where this picture was taken from, and we're feeding the bulls and cattle. And he said, "These are friendly cattle. You got no problem." You can't see it in this picture, but I'm in my sandals. I'm with them as we're feeding the cattle, and this bull charges me. Now, I am not a cowboy. I spent very little time on a farm growing up. I just instinctively grabbed the horn, and in that moment, learned something. I couldn't have told you what take the bull by the horns really meant. What it means is, in this out of control animal that I have no business physically interacting with, there is a leverage point, and it's the horns. And it'll turn the bull. Synchro is a leverage point. It will turn the bull. Now, I asked about project managers. Any mid-level or upper-level management? C-level, executive level? Okay. Something else happened. I'm not on the truck, obviously. 8 adults, 7 kids, plus me. Everyone is yelling, "Charlie, Charlie, get in the truck." Of course I want to be in the truck. I don't want to be sitting here wrestling with a bull. Except one. My daughter Lucy, at that time age 8, on recording this, is heard yelling, "Suey, suey, suey," at the bull, and that's her hand with a piece of bread. And as I brake, she throws that bread in front of the bull's nose. She did something that mattered. So as management, as you grow into management, I'd ask you to remember, don't yell at us to get back on schedule. Of course we'd rather be on schedule. Help us do something about it. Now, is there anything about this picture you've seen before? No. Let me help you out, because I forgot to show you as I was juggling a soccer ball. But one of the things we would do that I really liked doing, because I had long legs and I'd never beat anybody in the sprints, I enjoyed doing the crossover when I was a kid, right? I could beat everybody in this. It's just a thing we did, right? We just practiced it. I hadn't done it for 25 years. But I was really glad that I'd done the crossover as I was moving away from that bull, because I didn't fall on my butt. I got over to the tree, and I was okay. Play matters. Practice matters. Simulation matters. It's how people learn. It pays off. I really did grow up loving British literature. Maybe that's a sign of a mental defect, a sense of craziness, or maybe there is something to be recognized about the capacity to turn a clever phrase. And Churchill's comment here, that history will be kind to me for I intend to write it, is really a reflection not on the topic of history, but on his confidence in the future. As we are here together today to celebrate the sight that's enabled by 4D, the way that this tool empowers us to empower people to deliver in the field, we can each one of us leave with full confidence that the future will be kind to us, for we intend to build it. Thank you.